Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the EDH Recast. I'm your host, Joey Schultz, and right now I am not joined by my fantastic co-hosts because I'm here for a super short intro of what this episode is all about. This is a Challenge the Stats Extravaganza episode, a compilation of some of our favorite under and overplayed cards throughout the cast's 300 episodes. Better be ready to jot down some notes on this episode because you are guaranteed to hear about some really cool synergies from us, from friends of the show, and from listeners. I don't want to keep you waiting too long, so real quick, I'd like to thank our show's sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Dragon Shield, who make excellent durable card sleeves to protect your decks. I am a very heavy mash shuffler, so I need sleeves that don't split, but which still move smoothly, and Dragon Shield has never let me down. Plus, if you click the link in the description, you can get a hold of our EDH Recast exclusive sleeves. They are so fantastic. The design of them is so slick. For the listening audience who don't have a visual, think Dark Side of the Moon vibes. Again, you can get a hold of those sleeves on Dragon Shield's website, linked in the description. And to do Dana proud here, thanks for listening while I spieled all about Dragon Shield. And of course, this show is brought to you by you, our fantastic listeners and supporters on Patreon, without whom this entire show would not be remotely possible. We love giving our patrons their EDH recognition, doing fun EDH reconnaissance, and enjoying some good old-fashioned EDH recreation with them too. And you know, funny enough, one of the many perks that we offer to our supporters on Patreon, in addition to things like access to our Discord, is our spreadsheet of the entire history of Challenge the Stats picks throughout the show. You gotta think, over 360 episodes, usually 3 challenges per episode, there's like 1,000 challenges we've done over the history of this cast. So you could say this here video, this compilation episode, is a little amuse-bouche to whet your appetite. So if you want more where this came from, consider supporting us on Patreon if that makes sense for you, and there are tons of free ways to help support the show, and every bit matters. The likes and subscribes do honestly make all the difference to help us out on YouTube. Only about half of the folks who watch the channel are subscribed. So if you want more, consider hitting those buttons to get more cool content like this. We love hearing from you in the comments, and it is always such a treat when we see someone has left us a podcast review too. And of course, we can't forget one of our favorite things, and that is the Patreon shout out. So I hope you'll all join me in thanking our patron member Lee Green for their support of the show. Lee Green, thank you so much for your support. Your last name is awesome. That's a great color to play, although I do think it would be really ironic if you end up being like an Is It player instead of a green player. Alright, I appreciate you so much for listening to me while I do some EDH record keeping, but I EDH reckon it's time that we get into the main show. There's so much data on EDH Rec, but we don't always agree with it, so please enjoy an entire episode of Challenge the Stats.
My challenge is one that I myself have brought to the show before. It's an instant from way back in Mercadia Masks block. Mercadia's Downfall. It's 2 and a red, 3 mana total. Attacking creatures get +X/+O till end of turn, where X is a number of non-basic lands defending player controls. So it's basically an overrun in red. It's, in a lot of cases, better than an overrun, particularly if you're playing some kind of a token deck that doesn't have access to green especially. So like Edgar Markov or Matt's good buddy Valduke, or basically anything that's going to go wide, any of the Krenko variants, or anything that goes wide that doesn't have access to green. It's a 3 mana kill target player spell very, very often as a combat trick. It's not ever going to be dead. Fairly frequently, it could be, +8/+O to all your creatures. It's just an absolute beating. And it's only in 80 some decks in EDH Rec. It's in, I think, 87 currently right now. So it's scarcely played, if at all. And Joey, you were talking about cards that maybe don't see play like Path to Exile because of their price. This is a card that I would wager doesn't see much play, in large part because it's old and it's never had a reprint. So people don't know it exists, probably. That's why you don't see this card in, any more decks when it's an absolute house.
Oh, yeah, totally. And this is the kind of thing that maybe some data might accidentally bury a little bit. 87 decks total, not even 87 decks within a particular commander, just total. But this is an absolute beating, because if there's one thing that EDH Rec players like, it's some non-basic color fix and lands.
You bet.
This almost turns into, I know this is blasphemy, I'm talking against one of my favorite cards. It's almost a better version of Triumph of the Hordes. If you're playing against people that just aren't playing enough basics, like I always tell people to do, they're going to get blown out by this card.
This is one that we've talked about way in the past. I am using these Challenge Stats picks to talk about some old favorites that I really love, and that really frustrate me that they aren't seeing more play. I'm talking about one of my favorite white cards ever. This is Righteous Aura, a 2-mana enchantment that allows you to pay 1 white mana and 2 life, and the next time a source of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, you prevent that damage. This is so powerful. It doesn't even require you to target a source. So if an Omnath is attacking you for 5 damage, you can just say, nah, it's going to be, I'll pay 2 life and take nothing. If someone's using a huge Comet Storm targeting you for a bajillion damage, nah, next time a source of my choice, that Comet Storm, I'm going to prevent that, and it's just going to be me losing 2 life. This is a very powerful way to make sure that no one does a ton of damage to you. It is one of the best white enchantments that I've been able to find. Really feels great to be defensive behind this one, and it is just shocking to me that it's only showing up in 521 decks total, according to EDHREC. That is far too low. This is one of the best white enchantments that people just aren't playing, and they really should be. So if you're afraid of that Cavalier damage that Matt is going to do, or the Trample Death Touch damage that Dana is going to do, this is a very good enchantment for you to hide behind.
Well, my challenge comes to us courtesy of Nick Ross. One of the listeners sent us an email with a interesting challenge stats that I really actually appreciated. So Myriad Landscape is the card we're going to talk about today. It is just a land, enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice it to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type and put them on the battlefield. Well, what Nick is challenging here specifically is in colorless decks. So currently, Myriad Landscape is being played in 17% of Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger decks, and 30% of Emrakul, the Promised End decks. The problem is that in those colorless decks, you can't really activate Myriad Landscape because wastes don't share a land type. There is no land type to those. It's not a forest or a plains or anything like that. It's just a basic land. So what Myriad Landscape basically becomes is an enter the battlefield tapped basic land that doesn't do anything. And I think that number in Ulamog, Ceaseless Hunger decks, in those Emrakul Promised End decks, is much too high because it basically is a worse waste in all those decks. Blasted Landscape is a substitute I think people should be playing that's only showing up on 37% of all colorless decks right now, which is just a enter the battlefield, you can tap it for a colorless, or you can cycle it away. Those are the types of cards that I really like instead of Myriad Landscape, because in a colorless deck, you can't ever get any lands out of your deck with it, and it's just strictly a better, or a worse, I should say, waste in those colorless decks. So good call, Nick Ross. You're not quite Rick Ross, but you're pretty dang close with this pick.
That is an absolutely great. That is not the kind of thing that I would have noticed even, because it's just like, this gets me to the basic lands, right? That's what Myriad Landscape does. That's such an intuitive thing to do, but they don't have basic land types, so it can't get those. Oh man, yeah, that means it's definitely played too much.
Yes.
So I have a challenge this week that was suggested to me, but just by a person I was playing in a pod with. And they were playing, I think it was an Anawan, the Ruin Thief deck, but that really wasn't relevant. The card is Insight. It's 2 and a blue. It's an enchantment. Whenever one of your opponents plays a green spell, you draw a card. It's currently in about 3,600 decks in EDHREC, and the person who dropped it on turn 3 mentioned that they put it in their deck because they were needing to substitute something in until they got a hold of Heuristic Study. Heuristic Study, also an enchantment, also draws you cards, also costs 3 mana, and it costs like almost $50 versus Insight that costs less than $1. And the player noted that while they were running Insight as their replacement for Heuristic Study, it drew almost as many cards as they were used to drawing with Heuristic Study. So when they finally got one, they just left Insight in alongside Heuristic Study. And it then proceeded to draw probably a dozen cards over the course of the next 3 turns, because 2 of the 3 people were playing green, and they were like not going to not cast green spells. And unlike Heuristic Study, you can't play around it either. So I'm not saying you should run Insight over Heuristic Study, but it's a ridiculously powerful card in a deck that wants Heuristic Study that costs less than $1 and generates a ton of card advantage. Only draws off green spells, but there's a lot of people playing a lot of green spells in Commander. So this definitely should be in more than 3,000 some decks. If you're looking for a budget replacement or just another Heuristic Study-esque effect, give Insight a look. The card's fantastic.
I mean, turns out the Rhystic Study we have at home is still a pretty good card compared to a lot of other
There's no at home is still a pretty good Rhystic Study. Absolutely. Nice.
I absolutely love that. All right, I will move to my challenge now, and I want to talk about the new Shelob Child of Ungoliant Commander, which this thing, just real quick, is absolutely bonkers. Like, this is a 6-mana 8/8 Spider Demon, and it does not have downsides. It only has upsides. This is a 6-mana 8/8 with Death Touch and Ward 2, and it gives your other spiders Death Touch and Ward 2, and it says whenever another creature dealt damage this turn by a spider you control that dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a food artifact with the classic food ability, sacrifice it, pay 2, you gain 3 life, and it loses all other card types, which that food token also is just like off the chain. I absolutely love this. So already, aside from like the fact that this commander is just bonkers, 6-mana 8/8 with upside, like what is going on there? I want to dig into a possible non-bow that's going on in some of its deck data that I think is important for people who are building this commander. Specifically, the card Academy Manufactor is showing up in 35% of the over 1,500 Shelob decks we already have in the database, and I think that one probably needs to be scaled back, not because Academy Manufactor is not a good card. That card's awesome. That card's cracked. If you would make a clue, food, or treasure, instead create one of each, what an amazing creature. I love this thing. The problem is that apparently that replacement effect conflicts with Shelob's replacement effect. So if you were to try and make that food token off of Shelob, but you were to apply the Academy Manufactor effect, you would just get a regular food, and you would not get the food that is the copy of the creature, but it has all of those abilities, but it loses the other card types and stuff. So you would just get like the regular Academy Manufactor output, and you wouldn't get the special food token, which is kind of the thing that you want from that commander after all. I don't personally entirely know exactly how that is all supposed to work, but I looked up, and Wizards of the Coast rules manager Matt Tabak is like, yeah, no, you just end up with a clue, a treasure, and a regular food. So I'm going to take a word from the rules manager guy that this doesn't quite work the way that people want it to. So 35% of folks playing Academy Manufactor and Shelob might be a little bit too high because it is a non-bow with the commander.
Well, I'm going to wrap us up this week. And so this week I have a listener submitted challenge, which comes to us from one of our Patreon members in our Discord community. So Han Shot First, which agree, Han did shoot first, sent us a message in our Discord that said, I have a challenge that's pretty easy to overlook, but it's for a non-bow in Chainer Nightmare Adept deck. So for those of you who don't remember, Chainer Nightmare Adept is 2 and a Rakdos that says you can discard a card and you may cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn, activate only once each turn, and then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until your next turn. So right there, it's reanimating, it's casting things from your graveyard, a lot of stuff going on there. But Han points out that Chainer's deck is full of awesome graveyard shenanigans, but notably includes cards like Flayer of the Hatebound and Phyrexian Dragon Engine that care about entering the battlefield from the graveyard. Now, while Chainer's got a lot of standard reanimation effects in the 99, the activated ability casts the creatures from the yard, which means they go to the stack and then enter the battlefield instead of triggering from the graveyard type of effects. The secondary haste kind of takes this into account, but depending on the makeup of the individual lists, it might not be able to consistently trigger Flayer type of effects that players think initially. And so this is absolutely true, and Flayer of the Hatebound is still showing up in a good amount of Chainer decks, almost 40%, and this is kind of proof that people weren't really paying attention the last time that we talked about this, because back in episode 144, we actually had another listener submit this exact challenge. Flayer the Hatebound doesn't work with Nightmare Adept. And so if folks weren't listening 3 years ago to us, maybe listen this time to when our listeners are just kind of pointing out, hey, kind of a non-bow, you're not getting Flayer the Hatebound type of effects. Maybe you shouldn't be playing that in these Chainer Nightmare Adept decks. It's still showing up at a significant percentage. So Han, thanks for pointing this out again. It was a great challenge back then. It's a great challenge now because players have had 3 years to learn that's not how it works. Now, pre-con effect, I get it, but also you can still take the cards out.
You can't, or just be especially conscious of like, do I have enough direct reanimation in this deck to still make that effect worth it? But like, don't get got by the non-bow. So Han, thank you so much for submitting that again, because if the data is still where it was at 3 years ago, you're right, we got to challenge that. Thank you so much, Han. I'll move now to our listener submitted challenge this week, and it comes to us from super fan of the show, JJ Mickey. JJ wanted to point out a card that I'm pretty sure we've mentioned on a past episode, but like, it's still only showing up in about like 2,000 decks or something like that, and it's the card Psychic Possession. Oh man, Psychic Possession, it's just good. I just really like it. Psychic Possession is an aura that Dana introduced me to. You enchant it to another player, you'll skip your draw step, but whenever that player draws a card, so will you. So if your opponent is out there doing, for example, Consecrated Sphinx things, it'll definitely get very, very fun. JJ points out that Taigam Sidisi's hand is one of the commanders that is playing this card most of all. About like 42% of Taigam decks are playing Psychic Possession because Taigam already makes you skip your draw step, so this is just going to be free extra card advantage. But the challenge that JJ wanted to put forward is that it belongs in more than just Taigam decks. For example, a commander like Xyrus, the Writhing Storm, which also makes your opponents draw a lot of extra cards, will give you even more card draw from this thing. Psychic Possession is just such a cool card, and I don't like that it's only showing up in about 2,000 decks right now. This is a neat piece of work that will really make your opponents second guess how much card advantage they want to play when you are benefiting from it so much. Like, how are they going to cast a Brainstorm when you've got a Psychic Possession on them, you know? So definitely give this card a look, and JJ, thank you so much for bringing it back to challenge the stats.
So my challenge of stats is for a card from way back in the original Zendikar block. It's an instant speed, 7 mana colorless spell. Technically, it's a tribal instant Eldrazi, not of this world. And not of this world says, counter target spell or ability that targets a permanent you control. Not of this world costs 7 less to cast if it targets a spell or ability that targets a creature you control with power 7 or greater. And I'm essentially challenging this in any deck where your commander by default has a power of 7 or greater. Just looking at the most popular commanders list, there's 3 right there: Ghalta Primal Hunger, Gishath Sun's Avatar, and the Ur-Dragon. So basically it's a free spell that stops someone from targeting your commander with a spell or ability, presumably that would kill it or take control of it or something.
That is very, very interesting. A lot of those commanders help get the ball rolling. You mentioned Gishath, for example, which just dumps a bunch of dinosaurs into play. So having something to protect it for free that genuinely no one will expect at all can actually be a good way to get that ball rolling, to get those things into the first place. That way no one can path you in the middle of combat. That's a really cool pick, Dana. I'm on board with this. This is cool.
Yeah, I love this pick too.
Like if this was just a spell that didn't even say that it had to protect a creature that had power 7 or greater, like if you had a colorless spell that just said you can cast this for free to counter a spell or ability that targets your commander, that's probably worth running a spell just to save your commander that costs no mana. And this is essentially that in some decks. Plus, if you need to, you can hard cast it to save something else. That's decent flexibility.
Hey EDH Rec, congratulations on 200 episodes. My Challenge the Stats will introduce a little bit of mayhem to any table, but it's at its best in a deck that casts really big creatures really fast. For that reason, I'm challenging the stats on Pandemonium, specifically in Rakdos, Lord of Riots. Pandemonium is a red enchantment for 3 and a red. It reads, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, that creature's controller may have it deal damage equal to its power to any target of their choice. Yep, it's Warstorm Surge for everyone. I get a plate of damage for the table. Would you have some? Pandemonium is only in 1,286 decks on EDH Rec, and only 27 Rakdos Lord of Riots decks, including mine. To compare, Warstorm Surge is in a whopping 23,189 decks, and its creature sibling Terror of the Peaks is in 24,421. Coming in at only 4 mana, Pandemonium gets the party started 1 or 2 turns earlier. That means you can start throwing damage as soon as Rakdos hits the table. Plus, your creatures are likely to be the biggest and baddest creatures on the battlefield, so it'll take some doing for another player's creatures to take them out. Because it's inherently, dangerous, Pandemonium shows up primarily in Chaos decks like Norn the Wary. But I challenge that for decks that want to do as much damage as fast as possible, the risk is worth the reward. I mean, you're playing Rakdos. Live a little.
Hey, EDH Rec, congrats on 200 episodes. It's Jake Boss here from the Command Zone. I'm here to challenge the stats today on Porcu Parrot. This goofy card is from Ikoria, and it's 3 and a red. and you can mutate it for 2 and a red. So that means you can put it on top or below any non-human creature. And then it reads, tap, deal X damage to any target where X is the number of times this is mutated. So most often 1, and then it changes our base power and toughness to a 3/4. I believe that this belongs in a Prosper Tomebound deck. This is one of the most popular commanders right now, and it has Death Touch stapled right on it, which, believe it or not, is really rare for a commander in these colors. If you scroll through EDH Rec, you're not going to see many commanders in red that just have Death Touch on it. So this Poison Arrow strategy is really great for clearing a path on everybody else's board, not just pinging damage on our opponents, but 1 tap, remove a creature every single turn. This is a really solid card, and it takes our base stats to 3/4 from a 1/4, which, who knows, might become relevant at some point. As of now, this card is only in 1,827 decks on EDH Rec, which makes total sense because of the lack of Death Touch in red. But in Prosper decks, we're only seeing it in 12 lists out of over 4,000. And that's totally nutty. This is a pretty solid card in that list, and I think that you should really give it a try. Also, side note, if you're a Vrondis player, this is a great way to just pop himself every single turn. But that's the card that I'm challenging the stats on. Porky Parrot, give it a try.
Hey, EDH Redcast, happy 200 episodes. I'm so excited for you guys. For my challenge the stats, I actually wanted to choose a card that I have in my personal MEL the Blessed deck list. It is actually not featured on MEL's EDH Rec page at all, which I think is a little surprising if I'm being honest. For those of you who don't know, MEL the Blessed is a 4-mana Selesnya unicorn from Jumpstart that has a 3-mana Flicker ability, which I really love. And the card that I want to challenge the stats with today is Haze Frog. Haze Frog is a 5-mana frog with flash that fogs when it enters the battlefield. And normally this would be a once and done thing, but what's really cool is that with MEL, you have a repeatable fog on a little froggy body. He just hip hops, flickering and fogging, and I just think it's super cool, super underutilized. It's hysterical and a really fun trick that I really recommend you guys run in your MEL decks.
Well, I'll take it for us next then. So I have our listener submitted challenge, which is submitted to us from Discord member Mr. Necromancer. So Joey, I know you already like this challenge.
Heck yeah.
So Mr. Necromancer had a really good non-bow, and it's another one that we really like seeing. And it's similar actually to a challenge that we had a ways back, but it's a nice reminder every now and then. So they said already got one that's a non-bow that I came across while I was building up my own Rendmaw Creaking Nest. So the card Compost is showing up on a whole bunch around 15% of the time as of writing of Rendmaw lists as a cheeky way to gain some card draw from little bird tokens dying. Unfortunately, this does not work. In the Magic rules, tokens are not cards, therefore would not count as a black card entering your opponent's graveyard. And this is a really, really good catch. So Compost, for those who don't remember from when we talked about this back with the Daryl Hunter of Walker's legend that we talked about a while back, Compost is 1 and a green for enchantment that says whenever a black card is put into your opponent's graveyard, you may draw a card. And Rendmaw, as they mentioned, is all about making a whole bunch of 2/2 tokens for your opponents whenever you're playing a card that has 2 or more card types. So you're giving your opponent a bunch of different tokens, and then in theory, Compost sees them die and you draw cards. Well, as we're pointing out here, tokens are not cards, so they are never going to proc Compost. And so I see why people would be latching onto this, but it's an important rules kind of interaction to keep in mind in the deck building process. So using it as a clever trick with Rendmaw sadly does not work the way you want, and you may want to consider something else. So absolutely, Mr. Necromancer, this is a great catch. It's a really important interaction that you would want it to work. I want it to work too, but unfortunately the rules don't let it happen. So if you're looking for things that deal with tokens, remember, tokens are not actual cards. And again, with some of these older cards, when it says whenever a black card is put into an opponent's graveyard, it can't be those tokens. So good catch, Mr. Necromancer. Thank you for the submissions, and hopefully we'll catch all these non-bows here soon too.
Heck yeah, we love a non-bow challenge. Terrific challenge, I love it. All right, I'm going to move on to my challenge here, which I got to talk about Temet Noctamun's Will, an Esper zombie precon commander that came out very recently, already has 4,000 plus decks to its name. This thing's so terrific. 5-mana Esper zombie wizard. It's a 4/4 with vigilance and menace. Whenever you attack, you draw a card and then discard a card. Whenever you draw a card, zombies you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Oh, it's spicy. Like the card Knowledge is Power on a commander and cares about zombies, I love 100% of the things that are happening here. But there's a card that we've challenged in the past as being kind of an underplayed, cool, combat-y draw spell that I think really belongs in Temet decks. Keep Watch is currently only showing up in 14% of the 4,000 plus Temet decks that have been built so far. Keep Watch is a 3-mana blue instant. Draw a card for each attacking creature.
It's good. That's good.
That can be really cool when, your opponent, Matt Morgan, has an Avenger of Zendikar attacking you with like 12 Saproling things, and then you draw 12 cards for 3 mana. So it's already cool for that reason. So it's great as a defensive tool because you can draw so many cards, and then maybe you'll find a removal spell or even more stuff. Like, it's a cool surprise trick when enemies are attacking. Very versatile card. But here it's even more versatile than we thought, because if you attack with, say, 6 zombies, your commander loots a card. Your zombies will get, a +1 off of that. And then you keep watch on yourself and you draw 6 more cards and then give them a further +6/+6 mid-combat, maybe even after people have declared blockers. Keep Watch is an amazing card already. It is cracked in this deck. Get Keep Watch into Temet immediately. This card is fantastic. This commander is ludicrous. I really love this synergy, and I hope it shows up a little bit more for that Zombo man.
Yeah, there's so many fun interactions with this new Temet. I'm very curious what other Keep Watch type of effects there are, because turning these into overrun effects is nothing to be joked around with.
I draw cards and it kills you. Like, I punch you with my brain is fantastic.
Yeah, pretty much.
My challenge stat is brought to us by patron supporter Tristan Dementia Master. Tristan has suggested Grim Feast. I think that's a very good call. This is an old card from back in Mirage, so Tristan is making suggestions true to my heart here. At the beginning of your upkeep, Grim Feast deals 1 damage to you, but whenever a creature is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you gain life equal to its toughness. And that's for 3 mana, so it's Golgarian 1. It's only in 356 decks, I would say, probably largely because it's so old. If you don't know it exists, you're just not going to see it lying around at your local gaming store or anything. But there's some commanders that have really excellent synergy with this. Dina, Soulsteeper, that we got in Strixhaven, whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. That's going to proc, oftentimes you're relying on the lifelink to get that kind of life gain to deal damage to people. Whenever anything dies, even if you destroy it, if someone sacrifices it, doesn't matter, you're going to get those triggers. You have commanders like Savra, Queen of the Golgari, where you need to pay 2 life to get a trigger. The thing you're going to kill with Savra is then going to gain you the life back that you just lost paying it to destroy it in the first place. There's just a lot of really good effects in Golgari that care about you gaining life accidentally for killing other people's creatures, and this definitely should show up in more than 356 decks. And the art is horrifying as well, if that's something you care about.
Yes, it's primed for a great spot in a whole bunch of decks, so that's a really great one. Thank you so much, Tristan.
Ooh, boy, I got a good one. And again, if we weren't dropping hot enough takes, so my pick is Tarnished Citadel. This is a land. And it's not a particularly good one. And when I say that, I'm talking specifically in the context of CEDH decks where it is almost exclusively played. This is a land that taps for 1 colorless mana, or it has another ability where you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, but it deals 3 damage to you. So it's like if you added a City of Brass plus a Mana Confluence plus another 3rd one.
Yeah.
That's this. It is so much life to pay for mana fixing. And if I could understand it in 5 decks, which I might be able to, it's played in Najeela quite frequently. What I cannot understand is when people play it in 3-color decks and less. I'm looking at the EDH rec page right now. It is played in 20.68% of Ishai Tevesh decks. That's a 3-color Esper deck. 20.68% of those decks. 12% of Ishai Jeska decks. 11.9% of Tevesh Timna decks. People stop playing this land in your 2 and 3 color decks. It is just not worth it. A basic is going to be worth way more if you run into land hate, and it is never going to be worth this, especially if you're playing a black deck where you're probably playing ad nauseum and your life total is relevant. You're not going to want to take 3 damage for mana fixing.
Oh, that's a good point. Ad nauseum is going to be huge on that. Oh, yeah.
Yep. Every time you tap this, it costs you 3 cards off ad nauseum. Think of it that way.
This is one of those cards that I would oftentimes see in CEDH lists and be like, that doesn't seem like a good value in this 2 or 3 color deck, but I'm probably missing something because I don't know enough of the interactions. Like there's probably some reason for this that I'm not getting. So I'll just assume that that it's there. But if there isn't, it's people are just using it for color fixing and willing to pay that price. That seems like a relatively steep price to be paying every turn, particularly since in the last few years, it seems like we've seen a rise of at least a few more combat-oriented CEDH decks, at least more than there felt like there was, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, which makes that life total even more relevant.
Yeah, and like most of the time people play it because the flexibility is important when you're trying to hit multiple colored pip spells early in the game. First 3 turns of the game, you want to make sure that your land's tapped for your colors. But if you're in a 2-color deck, like a basic is going to do that for you. Like it's a basic. They tend to be quite good especially under like Blood Moon, Back to Basics, all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
So I'll get us started off this week, and I've been going through and just trying to find some different ways that people approach the game. And Jesse Plotkin, who writes articles over at EDH Rec, who writes the Singleton Schmingleton article series, just talking about being able to find multiple copies of different types of effects, had a really good synergy that I just wanted to kind of drive in and just kind of expand on. So Lae'zel's Acrobatics is a card I just totally missed over. Just leave it to Baldur's Gate being the set that 2 years later is still giving us so many gems.
Yeah.
So Lae'zel's Acrobatics is 3 and a white for an instant that says exile all non-token creatures you control, then roll a d20, and on a 1 to 9 roll, you return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, or if you hit a 10 to 20, you return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control, then exile them again and return them to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So if you're playing anything that likes to flicker any given spell, maybe like a Panharmonicon deck, I just think this is absolutely a card you want to be giving another look at. I mean, yes, there's a lot of decks out there. Panharmonicon is in almost 150,000 decks. And there's all sorts of different versions of Panharmonicon now with the new Elish Norn that doubles your triggers. And there's a few, but not a ton, of ways to kind of get more triggers out of this. So Lae'zel's Acrobatics is only played in 24% of decks also running Panharmonicon. If you want to double and then double the double, which is a math lesson I'm not ready to give to all of you here, this is absolutely a fantastic card that's going to save your board. It's going to return them at the beginning of the next end step, which means you can dodge board wipes and also get all those triggers. And if you roll well, you're going to get so many more triggers there. It's just an incredible value card. Absolutely worth running. And like I said, Baldur's Gate, I forgot this card existed. And this is a great reminder that Baldur's Gate is going to still give us cards probably for the next 5 years, I would wager. But yeah, if you're playing Panharmonicon or just any deck that loves Enter the Battlefield abilities, Lae'zel's Acrobatics is a fantastic card.
And you say if you roll well, but like, isn't it even slightly more than half the time that's what you're going to get, just like with the math on it? Like,
yeah, you don't even need to roll well.
It's just like, yeah, good odds.
Very good odds. Yeah, and there's other cards similar to this. Semester's End. It has the same mana cost that brings them in with +1/+1 counters or loyalty counters. There's a whole slew of cards like this, but Lae'zel's Acrobatics, if you just really want to go hard with ETB triggers, I don't think there's many cards that are going to be better than that.
Yeah. The times that you get that double blink benefit, it's just going to be, that is so much value. It'll be very difficult for your opponents to catch up. And if you're doing it like to save from a board wipe, Matt, I love this. I absolutely love this. What a cool card. I'll move to my challenge now. And it's a little bit of a recycled challenge from a bit ago. On a past episode, I believe I once talked about how Kadena Slinking Sorcerer can actually make use of the card Mystic Forge because of some weird stuff. Kadena Slinking Sorcerer is the Sultai Morph Commander, and Mystic Forge is that strange 4-mana artifact that says you can look at the top card of your library at any time, you may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library, and you can also tap it, pay a life, and exile the top card of your library. The reason that this is relevant for Kadena is because you can actually cast morph spells this way, which seems counterintuitive, but according to the rulings on Mystic Forge's Scryfall page, if the top card of your library has a morph ability, you can cast it face down from the top of your library, even if it's not normally a colorless card. So that's awesome, and the reason that I want to recycle it here, I mean, yeah, it's relevant that it's only showing up currently in 26% of the 4,600 decks for Kadena currently, but also in the Murders at Karlov manner, not Markov manner. We've just gotten some. I'm gonna have to correct myself every single time with that said. We've also just gotten the set mechanic Disguise, where you can once again cast cards face down for 3 mana as a 2/2 colorless creature, and it happens to have Ward 2, because of course it does. Everything needs to have Ward 2 these days. But if this is another way to create colorless things, then Mystic Forge will help you cast those Disguise cards too, I assume. There's no reason to assume that it would work any differently than the current way that Morph works. So yeah, look at Mystic Forge if you're going to end up playing any of those Disguise or Morph synergies, because this is a really cool way to get those creatures off the top of your deck and right into play where you want them. So give Mystic Forge a look.
Tube of Glue gave us a question we read a few minutes ago, but they are also the suggester of this week's listener challenges stats. And Tube of Glue writes, time for everyone's favorite pastime, non-bow challenges.
Ooh.
And this time I'm going to keep it short. Shrine is not a creature type. It's an enchantment type. And therefore 78% of eligible Goshen Tie of Life Origins decks should be reconsidering the Roaming Throde they include in their deck, because it can't choose Shrine or can't choose your commanders as a creature type at all. There's maybe some decks out there that have enough other things you could choose that could justify it, but I would wager of that 78% running it, 90% of those are running it because they think they can say Shrine, and you in fact can't in that deck. So great non-bow, great flying Tube of Glue. Good question earlier. Thank you very much for supporting the show and being a great listener.
Yeah, short, sweet, to the point. We love non-bow challenges here, and that's a very tricky one. Shrine being an enchantment subtype rather than a creature type. Yeah, it's hard to catch, but that is definitely relevant. So keep your eye out for any of those cards that you'd want to put into your Shrine deck to float your creatures, because there are enchantment creatures, but the Shrine is part of the enchantment part, not part of the creature part, which is weird. This game is weird. This game has weird rules, you guys.
Slippery Bogbonder is the card that I'm challenging. It is 3 and a green for a human druid that has flash and hexproof. It's a 3/3 and says, when Slippery Bogbonder enters the battlefield, put a hexproof counter on target creature, then move any number of counters from among creatures you control onto that creature. So not only do you get to put all sorts of +1/+1 counters that you may incidentally be playing onto Kyler, but you put a hexproof counter onto Kyler, which does actually count as a counter that's going to make all of your creatures bigger. So at worst, Slippery Bogbonder makes Kyler give all your humans +2/+2 because of the abilities. It protects your commander. It's another human, which is going so. Slippery Bogbinder essentially is a 5/5 that makes your commander hexproof. This card is so silly. Just play this. It's only in 26% of Kyler decks so far. This is probably one of the best cards in the deck. It's a $1 card right now. It's so good. If you have any leftover Ikoria cards from when Ikoria was dealing with all sorts of keyword counters, that's also going to feed into Kyler's ability. That's just one synergy that, man, I discovered on accident, and I love it now, and I think everybody should be taking advantage of it just because, yeah, Slippery Bogbonder, 26%. Oh, it's so good. So good. Best card of the deck.
Well, we were talking about paying life to draw cards earlier, and one of my favorite cards in recent years is Stinging Study, which is a 5-mana instant. You draw cards and lose life equal to the mana value of your commander. I tend to run it in decks that have a higher CMC commander, 4, 5, 6 mana, because spending 5 mana to draw that many cards is a pretty good trade-off most of the time. But it doesn't do you much good if you've got like a 2 mana value commander or a 3 mana value commander. It feels less impactful for paying that much mana. But Stinging Study is worth noting. It's in 25,000 decks, almost 26,000. One card that is also black, that also costs 5 mana, is Necrologia, that's only in under 7,000 decks, 6,800 EDH rec. Necrologia, pay X life and draw X cards. That's it. You can only play it during your end step, so it's a instant spell. It's not quite as flexible as Stinging Study, where you can wait and see if you need to use your mana for something else, and before the end of the turn, draw a few cards. But similar effect. You're spending 5 mana, same as Stinging Study, and as much life as you want to pay, and you're oftentimes paying 5 or 6 with Stinging Study. Same thing, draw the same amount of cards. Like I said, it's not quite as flexible, but for being able to basically draw the same amount in decks that really don't want to be drawing Stinging Study, it's a pretty efficient draw spell, to the point where I do think if Stinging Study is in that many decks, Necrologia should be in more than the quarter of the amount of Stinging Study. So take a look at it if you like that effect, like doing that kind of thing in black, but don't have a commander that supports Stinging Study. Necrologia is a pretty solid card.
Oh my goodness, this card is bonkers in like Shield Through the Apocalypse or Quasar Augur of Agonies.
Right, where it winds up putting you life ahead.
What? And it's only in 20% of Quasar decks and 25% of Shieldra decks, and like that's. Oh,
and it hasn't had a reprint in a while. It's probably a card where people just don't even know it's a card that exists. So
I would say it's pretty seasoned, and it's the time it's been around.
Wow, that's an absolutely wild one, Dana. I like it a lot. All right, I'll move to my challenge here, and this is actually our listener-submitted challenge, the stats of the week, which comes to us via email from one Nick Comp, who has a very cool challenge for Miram Sentinel Worm decks, and it stars the card Cryptic Gateway, which is a card that I have absolutely looked at and wanted to make work before, and I've never been able to justify it, but I think that Nick has found a very good reason to play it in a Miram deck. Cryptic Gateway is the 5-mana artifact that says you can tap 2 untapped creatures you control, and you may put a creature card from your hand into play that shares a creature type with each creature tapped this way. So this would be a great deck, a great card for things that are built around a specific creature type, but also usually a lot of those things like elves and zombies or goblins or stuff like that are cheap enough that you're not going to want to take a speed bump on a card like this that will take a whole turn just so you can start cheating stuff into play. Like, you'd want to play this in a deck that has high cost stuff, but if you're playing high cost stuff, then tapping them is a big ask. So it's kind of a card that's never really justified itself to me in a lot of decks. But Nick points out a synergy with Miram Sentinel Worm here that is actually kind of nutso. Like, Miram Sentinel Worm is that Temur dragon that gives you another copy of every dragon that you play. So with Miram in play and with the Gateway, every time that you use this ability to cheat a dragon into play, you have 2 dragons. And now you can tap both of those to play for free another dragon. And as Nick points out in the email that he sent us, you can also potentially in that deck play a lot of cards like Garruk's Uprising and Temur Ascendancy and a lot of other draw spells like that will just make you refill your hand as you're going. Miram might be like the one most amazing case for Cryptic Gateway that I've ever seen, and Nick points out that this has won him quite a big number of games ever since you tried it. It does seem like a win more card in a lot of places, but Miram might be one of the places that is best suited for this very strange card. It also just got reprinted in Dominaria Remastered. If folks want to make their already amazing Miram decks even more spicy, this is definitely worth a look. And it's currently showing up in only like 200 out of the 11,000 Miram decks out there. This is a cool sleeper pick. I think it's absolutely fantastic to bring that forward. Thank you so much for that challenge.
Yeah, Miram decks go burr, but finding new ways for it to go burr, that's actually kind of hard to do. So well played there. Well, my challenge this week is going to be for a whole category of cards, and that's a pretty broad stroke. But for the specific commander we're talking about, it actually kind of checks out when you look at it. So this week we're going to talk about Abaddon the Despoiler. So that's from the Warhammer 40k precons. It is the Grixis commander that is 5/5 with trample. It says, during your turn, spells you cast from your hand with mana value X or less have Cascade, where X is the total amount of life your opponents have lost this turn. So this deck likes to cascade, as it says, with the commander's abilities. So you're getting just a ton of value from every single spell that you cast on your turn, as long as your opponents have lost a little bit of life. But if you remember, whenever we talk about other famous Cascade commanders, there's a certain card type that we're not a big fan of that we're actually seeing folks play quite a bit of, and that is counterspells. And yes, leave it to me to tell people, don't play counterspells, don't play blue, oh, it's such a terrible color. But when you look at these types of decks, they're playing not just a bunch of counterspells, but they're playing a bunch of cheap counterspells. They're playing stuff like Swan Song. They're playing stuff like the OG counterspell. So there's a lot of stuff in there that you're able to cascade into that you don't necessarily want to be doing that. You're just losing value at that point. So if you're playing an offer you can't refuse, like all of these are in at least 10% of Abaddon decks, and you absolutely just don't want to be doing that. If you're playing counterspells, play those higher mana value ones so you're not cascading into All of those, if you're playing stuff like Spell Swindle, you're still going to have those counterspells. You're going to be able to protect your valuable stuff. Yes, it's a little bit more on the mana value side, but you're not going to accidentally cascade into it and then lose yourself a whole bunch of value. That's where you really kind of pin yourself down, and you don't want to be doing that. So if you're those Abaddon players or you're building the deck, make sure you're avoiding those cheap and efficient counterspells. It feels really weird saying this because we love cheap and efficient counterspells in this format, but at the same time, you're going to be losing value. So make sure that you're just being critical of what cards you're putting in there and not just copying and pasting, because you might encounter some of these non-bows.
Yep, Cascade and Counterspell is an infamous pairing, an infamous non-bow since the dawn of time, or rather since the dawn of Cascade. Yeah, good shout, Matt.
My challenge is brought to us by listener Jack Martyr, and it's a Overplayed card in the few Volo Guide to Monsters decks we've already seen showing up on the site. As a reminder, Volo reads, whenever you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, copy that spell. And the challenge is on Guardian Project, an enchantment that reads, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Because of the way Volo works, the token enters the battlefield first because of the ability on Volo, which won't trigger Guardian Project because it's a token, and then the original will come into play, and Guardian Project sees the original and the token and says, well, you already have something with that name, so you don't draw a card. So it's very much a non-bow in a Volo deck, and it's showing up in about 1/3 of the Volo decks we're seeing on the website, and it probably just shouldn't be in that deck at all.
That is a very keen challenge, so thank you. Our listeners are real good at challenge the stats, y'all. Can I just say that?
Yeah, that was an excellent find, for sure.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to move to mine now, and I'm looking at an equipment that I don't think is getting enough love for Sir Gwyn, Hero of Ashvel. Sir Gwyn is a very fascinating Mardu commander that lets you equip equipment to your knights for just a cost of 0, which plays in really, really well for any of those really big equipment that have huge buffs and stuff, but sometimes they just have really cool utility effects that are really awesome too, such as the case for Heartseeker, a 4-mana equipment that says the equipped creature gets +2/+1 and can tap, unattach the Heartseeker, and destroy target creature. It also has a hefty equip cost of 5, but Sir Gwyn doesn't care about that because it will just make it attached to your knights for 0 mana instead. So you can just attach Heartseeker to any number of your knights, tap them for a quick destroy target creature, and then you can reattach it to another one of your knights so that you can keep threatening. What a great rattlesnake effect on an equipment that is only showing up in like less than a quarter of Sir Gwyn decks. This is a very, very cool ability that you can just move down the line with a whole bunch of knights, or you can attack with Sir Gwyn, who's got vigilance, and then tap mid-combat so that you can destroy something and continue your attack. A lot of utility here for some very cool equipment, so give Heartseeker a try if you're looking to bash face with a big knight.
So my challenge to stat is going to be Command the Dreadhorde, which is sorcery for 4 and 2 black. I believe this came out around the War of the Spark era, because it allows you to basically choose any number of target creatures and planeswalkers in any graveyard, bring them back to your side of the field, except you're going to take damage equal to the total CMC of all those cards. So big black spell, doing a lot of damage, but you're also getting a lot of creatures and or planeswalkers back. So I like to call this card my great value Rise of the Dark Realms, because for a while Rise of the Dark Realms was pretty expensive. And also I believe it's 7 and 2 black, so like a 9 CMC spell for that value. So like I said, I want to call this the great value one because I feel like you can pair this up with other cards to kind of help mitigate that damage that you otherwise would get from just playing the card by itself. So think about cards like Personal Sanctuary, which is a white enchantment for like 2 and a white. Basically, during your turn, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. Kind of similar to those old spells that you should see, like I'm pulling out this one from the bag, like Dana, like Circle of Protection spells, and it has a color like Circle Protection Black. You can just pay 1 and prevent all damage to you from a color of that source. So does the exact same thing and for the exact same amount of mana, which totals up to 9. So you get it for the free. However, here's an addendum. I also found one even better to kind of synergize or combo with this. Came across a card called Shadowbane, which is an instant for 1 and a white. This thing says prevent all damage to you or a creature you control from any one source, If that source is black, gain 1 life for each damage prevented this way. So this is a Rise of the Dark Realm that gains you life. I need to see more Command the Dreadhordes out there.
Said, I feel like you're cheating. You know that I play a lot of Reanimator, so you coming in here with a Reanimator card, you know I'm going to love it. You know I'm going to love it. There are a lot of clever things that you can do with this card for sure. I think a lot of the other ones, like, Rise of the Dark Realms, they're so famous that they take up a lot of the oxygen in the room, so to speak, but there are definitely clever things you can do with this one. And the fact that it hits all graveyards, there's a good amount of flexibility here. Personally, I want to see someone pair this up with Judith, Carnage Connoisseur, which can give your instants and sorceries lifelink, so the damage that this would deal to you, you just gain it right back anyway. There are a lot of ways to mitigate around this, and even if you're getting back, like, what, Kokosho's and Grey Merchant of Asphodels, you've got enough life to spare, probably. Like, yeah, this is a good card.
I agree. Great card.
So Sakashima's Will is that Commander Legend sorcery, part of the Jeska's Will cycle, but this time the blue one, a 4-mana blue sorcery that lets you do both of these things if you control your commander. First, target opponent chooses a creature they control and you gain control of it. That doesn't end at end of turn. And second, you choose a creature you control and each other creature you control becomes a copy of that chosen creature until end of turn. So Wilhelt is a zombie deck that makes just what I can basically only describe as a butt ton of zombie tokens all over the place. And when you get the opportunity to suddenly turn all of those tokens, decayed or otherwise, into, instead of being those tokens, they are now like Death Barons, which give all of your zombies +1/+1 and Death Touch, or you turn them all into Diagraph Captains, which give all of your zombies +1/+1 and damage your opponent if your zombies die, or an Undead War Chief, which gives them all +2/+1. Yeah, turning a board full of like 8 zombies into all being anthems and lords for each other, it's enormous. This has just so quickly become one of my absolute favorite spells to play in that deck. It currently doesn't show up on Wilhelt's page at all, and that needs to change. This is a powerhouse card for this commander, a bit of a sleeper, but it snuck up on me, and man, did it impress me. So Matt, you and I are totally in sync. It's all about the zombies this week. Graveyards are the best, man. It's awesome.
No, they're not.
So we recently had a challenge for the card Nanogene Conversion. I believe it was in Captain Necrod decks. Is that how you say that, Joey?
Nacatl.
Nacatl.
Yes, yeah. We had a listener challenge for that card as Underplayed, and I thought it was a great piece of tech.
It was. The challenge I have this week is from a listener, Wheels Up, and that's for Nanogene Conversion being overplayed in the Celestial Toymaker decks. And I kind of liked the symmetry of having a very cool card be overplayed in some decks and underplayed in other ones.
Yeah, okay.
The Celestial Toymaker is a Doctor Who card. It is 3 mana in Esper colors for a 2/4. Whenever the Celestial Toymaker attacks, look at the top 3 cards of your library and exile any number of them in a face-down pile and the rest in a face-up pile. Defending player chooses one of those piles and you put that pile into your hand. Then at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses 2 life for each spell or ability that caused 1 or more players to guess or to group cards or permanents into a pile this turn. So it's a deck basically built around making your opponents like make choices in terms of piling up cards. And then you're dealing damage to them for making those choices.
Like fact or fiction effects and stuff like that?
Yeah, just like that, Joey. Nanogene Conversion, for those that have forgotten, sorcery for 3 and a blue, choose target creature you control. Each other creature becomes a copy of that creature till end of turn, except it isn't legendary. First things first, I've actually seen this card be misused a couple different times. People sometimes miss that it says each other creature, and they read it as each other creature you control. So that can cause problems to begin with. This is something that turns all creatures into play into copies of that creature till end of turn. And that's a much, much different thing. And it's a much different thing in the Celestial Toymaker deck because of the way you stack triggers. So if you were forcing someone to do some searching and you've cast Nanogene Conversion and turned everything into Celestial Toymakers, you are the opponent of the person who has made their creatures into Celestial Toymakers. And because of the way triggers get stacked, you can wind up taking the damage before they take damage. And in the case that Wheels Up mentioned, when they cast the card, it created a situation where they died before anyone else because of the Celestial Toymakers they functionally gave to everyone else.
Wow. This is wild. I definitely, this is an interesting read on both the Nanogene and also on the Toymaker because, yeah, I'm reading this second paragraph very carefully. Beginning of each end step, each opponent loses 2 life for each spell ability that caused 1 or more players. So, like, it could be your own stuff, but it's not just, since you did it, only opponents are affected by it. So if you just gave an opponent who has a bunch of Saprolings, a whole bunch of Celestial Toymakers, and you played a Fact or Fiction, they're going to do a lot of damage to you. That is easy to miss and very, very cool, actually. I love this challenge, Wheels Up.
And it's in almost 30% of Celestial Toymaker decks.
Whoa.
And I'm sure there are situations where, like, you can, set everything up so it does work to your advantage. But I feel like it's really easy to not do that. So I think this is an excellent challenge and definitely a card I think that can backfire in a bunch of ways, including the original way I mentioned where like people just misread how it works.
So I'll move into my challenge then. So mine is submitted to us by a listener who went to patreon.com/EDHRECast, join our Discord community, and then we have a channel specifically for challenging stats. And so Trogdonite is their username. Good on ya, Trogdonite. But they had a really good comment, a really good catch for overplayed cards, which we always appreciate seeing. So Trogdonite commented that they want to challenge stats for Nikki of the Old Ways decks, or really any deck running Primal Surge. If you're playing Primal Surge as more than just a value piece to get a few permanents, you can't run any other cards that draw you a card when they enter the battlefield. Otherwise, you're going to deck yourself. So they mentioned specifically cards like Elemental Bond, Guardian Project. Those aren't May abilities. Garruk's Uprising is not a you may draw a card. It is you have to draw a card. So when you're looking at all these cards in these Primal Surge decks, and when you look at Nikki of the Old Ways, the page for the commander, over a third of the decks are playing Primal Surge as a way to generate a ton of value. So what you want to be sure of when you're building the deck is not being mindful of when you're going to cast that Primal Surge. If you're going to put those Garruk's Uprisings, those Guardian Projects into the battlefield, you're going to end up decking yourself if you're playing the Oops All Permanents version of the deck. So be very mindful of that. Garruk's Uprising is being played in 12% of these Nikia decks. And the typical deck isn't playing a ton of non-creatures because of Nikia's ability that says you can't play non-creature spells, but there still is going to be at least a few in every given deck. So make sure you're mindful of when you're casting these Primal Surges, because every now and then we see it happen and it's just like, well, you kind of knew what was going to happen. So this is a really good catch. Thank you for the submission, Trogdonite. It's always good to hear from our listeners. And again, patreon.com/EDHRECast if you want to submit your own challenges.
Ayo. Yeah, Garruk's Uprising. I just looked at the page for Primal Surge, and Garruk's Uprising shows up in 22% of decks that contain Primal Surge. Guardian Project shows up in 19% of decks that contain Primal Surge. And it's just like, yeah, watch out, because like they're great value engines, but if you're playing a dedicated Primal Surge deck, they could kill you. So like, be careful. I'll move on to our listener submitted challenge for this week, which comes to us from listener Gabriel GS in our Discord, who has a very spicy pick for the commander Kadira, Caller of the Small, which is a fantastic Selesnya commander that looks like it's only doing a little bit of stuff here, but it's actually like really, really kicking once you can actually like get some momentum behind it. This commander doubles your stuff, so you know it's good. Kadira, Caller of the Small, is a 3/3 with trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, for each token you control, you create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token, which can be modified with amazing effects like Divine Visitation, and if you've got a Cathar's Crusade, holy crap, this gets absolutely out of this world. But specifically the card that Gabriel wanted to challenge was the card Nacatl Warpride, which does not show up on the page for Kadira at all, which is ridiculous because Nacatl Warpride is so dang good with Kadira's effect. Nacatl Warpride is a 6-mana green creature originally from Future Sight. It must be blocked by exactly one creature if able, but most importantly, whenever Nacatl Warpride attacks, you put X tokens into play, tapped and attacking, that are copies of the Warpride, where X is the number of creatures the defending player controls, and then those tokens go away at the end of turn. You may know this card from certain decks like Wolfgar of Icewind Dale, or it does a whole bunch of work in Mirri Weatherlight Duelist as well, because you can double those triggers and make it difficult for your opponents to attack. But the important synergy here that Gabriel is pointing out with Kadira is that when Kadira hits an opponent and you have all of these amazing tokens with your Nacatl Warpride, Kadira's going to make a bunch of bunnies for you, and the bunnies will stick around. Those rabbit tokens will stay. So this is a very, very easy way to not only ruin an enemy token player's day by forcing them to do difficult blocks against your Nacatl Warpride, but also just get a bunch of extra stuff from it too. Kadira's a really, really cool commander. Just makes so many bodies, and this is also a card that's going to kick that Selesnya token strategy into an even higher gear. Matt, again, I know you're not with us, but I hope that you're proud, buddy. I hope you're proud that we're still doing the Selesnya stuff for you on the podcast, even when you're not with us.
What a Matt card that is too, absolutely. And as with Inundate, I think this is also a card that's a victim of just not having a reprint. It's not super expensive or anything, but I would wager there's a lot of folks that just don't know it exists because it hasn't been printed in like 15-ish years or so.
Sure.
And it was in a relatively obscure set, so I think this is a card that there's a lot of decks that would love to have it, and a lot of folks that just don't know it even is a card that was printed.
Mm-hmm. Makes a whole lot of sense to me.
So maybe we'll get something new down the road, Joey, and we can talk about how Nacatl Warpride had a 2,000% increase once they... there we go.
Yeah, I think this totally does qualify as one of those cards that, like, it seems a little bit like, it's an older card that you're like, I'm not sure. And then you see it in a game and you're like, wait, what does that card do? This totally qualifies as one of them. I would love to see the numbers on Nacatl Warpride jump up just across the board.
Yes.
It's a really, really cool card.
So I'm excited for this one. This was a card I've wanted to do for a few weeks, but I wanted to get a chance to cast it first on our stream on Twitch TV/EDH Retcast in a game before I challenged the stats in this card. And I got to do that last week. And the card is Simulacrum. It's an instant from Alpha that hasn't seen printing since 4th edition. But it's a cheap common. You can pick it up for 20 cents. The problem here is what Simulacrum says on the card and what its Oracle text says aren't really remotely related at all. So
what?
I think people don't play it because they don't know what it actually does. What the card says is all damage to you done so far this turn is retroactively applied to target creature you control, and further damage is treated normally. So if someone hits you for 20, you play Simulacrum, the damage is instead done to one of your creatures, presumably killing it, and you don't take that damage. That makes it kind of a bad fog for the most part. And I think if you want to do that, there's ways to run actual fogs in black that don't kill your creature. There's a couple of them. But that's not what the card does. What the Oracle text says is you gain life equal to the damage dealt to you this turn. Simulacrum deals damage to target creature you control equal to the damage dealt to you this turn. You gain life. So if you are playing a commander that cares about gaining life, this card does that. So if someone hits you for 20 damage and you play Simulacrum and you happen to be playing something like Veto, the Dusk Rose, that deals damage to an opponent based on the life you gain, for this 2 mana, you can dome somebody for 20. In addition to then, not taking the damage yourself. It's only in 78 decks on EDH Rec, and it definitely should be in more decks that care about life gain. And I would wager the reason it isn't is because the card doesn't say it gains you life. What it says it does and what it actually does aren't the same thing.
It's a testament to the obscurity of this card that you cast it against us on our stream during actual gameplay, and I still don't know what this card is.
I was so happy that I got to cast it against you guys. That was the highlight of that game for me.
Well, it's great because you say, play Simulacrum. My brain is just like, Solemn Simulacrum, that's a different thing. So I'm still just completely turned around by this completely obscure card. Dana, you've got a gift for finding the most out there cards imaginable for the challenge.
And I will say this, thank you, Joey, but it's not just that it's obscure. Like, it's legitimately a really good card if your deck does life gain stuff. So it should be in more than those 78 decks, and take a look at it.
Hey, it's Real-Time Joey again. I hope you enjoyed those 30 challenges, and I imagine if you've made it to this point, you're actually a little bit tired of hearing the word challenge by now. We've loved finding hidden gems and underplayed cards and interesting non-bows and cool synergies over the years, and it is also so neat to see what our listeners have found too. And I have to admit, listening back through these episodes and through these clips when I was putting this episode together, listening to things like changes in our voices or changes in where we were recording, this episode did did get me a little bit nostalgic, so I hope you enjoyed that part of the journey too. Remember, if you want access to the full spreadsheet, you can find it over on our Patreon, patreon.com/EDHRecast. You got to hear 30 challenges today, but with over 360 episodes in our catalog, usually with 3 challenges per episode, we've probably challenged 1,000 cards on this show, so you really only got a small teaser here. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And remember, there were a whole ton of episodes where we weren't even on YouTube yet, so those really old challenges could never even be seen in a video like this. So if you want an easy place to find those challenges, that's basically a Patreon exclusive. And the Patreon is also one of the easiest places for us to find these cool challenges from our listeners too. So if it makes sense for you to throw us a buck, we'd love to see you over at patreon.com/EDHRecast. Of course, there are always going to be free ways to support the show too. Liking and subscribing is so helpful, and leaving a review is tremendous too. Every bit helps. We wouldn't have gotten to where we are without all of your support. And of course, don't forget this show is brought to you by Dragon Shield. Those are the sleeves that I started my Commander journey with, and working with them has been such a dream. It's been like coming home after a stormy journey. We hope you like the exclusive EDH Rec sleeves. Remember again that you can find them linked below at the Dragon Shield store. They are beyond cool. Thank you again so much, Dragon Shield. And finally, of course, if you'd like to get a hold of any of the three of us, we are active on places like Blue Sky and Instagram. You can find Dana at Dana Roach, Matt at Mathimus55, and me at Joseph M. Schultz. And with that, it is time to call this episode to a close. So thank you all once again, and as always, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.